8 worst presidents in U.S. history. How do you determine who the worst presidents in USA history are? Asking some of the most notable presidential historians is a good place to start. In 2017, C-SPAN issued their third in-depth survey of presidential historians, asking them to identify the nation's worst presidents and discuss why. For this survey, C-SPAN consulted 91 leading presidential historians, asking them to rank the United States leaders on 10 leadership characteristics. Those criteria include a president's legislative skills, his relations with Congress, performance during crisis, with allowances for historical contests. Over the course of the three surveys, released in 2000 and 2009, some of the rankings have changed, but the three worst presidents have remained the same, according to the historians who were they. The results just might surprise you. 1 out of 8. James Buchanan. When it comes to the title of the worst president, historians agree James Buchanan was the worst. Some presidents are associated directly or indirectly with major Supreme Court rulings or their tenure. When we think of Miranda v. Arizona 1966, we might lump it up together with Johnson's Great Society reforms. When we think of Korematsu v. United States 1944, we can't help but think of Franklin Roosevelt's mass internment of Japanese Americans. But when we think of Dred Scott v. Sandford 1857, we don't think of James Buchanan. Buchanan, who made the pro-slavery policy a central tenet of this administration, boasted in advance of the ruling that the issue of slavery expansion was about to be resolved speedily and finally by the French Chief Justice Roger Taney's decision, which defined African Americans as subhuman non-citizens. Number 2 out of 8. Andrew Johnson. This is a country for white men, and by God, as long as I am president, it shall be a government for white men. Andrew Johnson, 1866. Andrew Johnson is one of the only two presidents to be impeached. Bill Clinton is the other. Johnson, a Democrat from Tennessee, was Lincoln's vice president at the time of assassination. But Johnson did not hold the same views on race as Lincoln, a Republican, and he repeatedly clashed with the GOP-dominated Congress over nearly every measure related to Reconstruction. Johnson tried to outmaneuver Congress in readmitting southern states to the Union, opposed the 14th Amendment, and illegally fired his Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, leading to his impeachment. Number 3 out of 8. Franklin Pierce. Franklin Pierce wasn't popular with his own party, the Democrats, even before he was elected. Pierce refused to appoint a vice president after his first vice president, William R. King, died shortly after taking office. During his administration, the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 was passed, which many historians say pushed the U.S., already bitterly divided over the issue of slavery, toward the Civil War. Kansas was flooded with pro- and anti-slavery settlers, both groups determined to create a majority when statehood was declared. The territory was torn by the bloody civil unrests in the year leading up Kansas's eventual statehood in 1861. Number 4 out of 8. Warren Harding. Warren G. Harding served only 2 years in office before dying in 1923 of a heart attack. But his time in office would be marked by numerous presidential scandals, some of which are still considered brazen by today's standards. Most notorious was the Teapot Dome scandal in which Albert Fall, the Secretary of the Interior, sold oil rights on federal land and profited personally to the tune of $400,000. Fall went to prison while Harding's Attorney General Harry Doherty, who was implicated but never charged, was forced to resign. In a separate scandal, Charles Forbes, who was head of the Veterans Bureau, went to prison for using his position to defraud the government. Number 5 out of 8. John Taylor. John Taylor believed that the president, not Congress, should set the nation's legislative agenda, and he clashed repeatedly with members of his own party, the Whigs. He voted a number of Whig-backed bills during his first months in office, prompting much of his cabinet to resign in protests. The Whig Party also expelled Taylor from the party, bringing domestic legislation to a near standstill during the remainder of his term. During the Civil War, Taylor vocally supported the Confederacy. Number 6 out of 8. William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison had the shortest tenure of the U.S. president. He died of pneumonia a little more than a month after his inauguration. But during his time in office, he accomplished virtually nothing of note. His most significant act was to call Congress into special session, something that earned the wrath of Senate Majority Leader and fellow Whig Henry Clay. Harrison disliked Clay so much that he refused to speak with him, telling Clay to communicate with him by letter instead. Historians say it was this discord that led to the Whigs eventually dismissed as the political party by the Civil War. Number 7 out of 8. Millard Fillmore. When Millard Fillmore took office in 1850, slave owners had a problem. When slaves escaped to free states, law enforcement agencies in the states refused to return them to their owners. Fillmore, who claimed to detest slavery but invariably supported it, had the Fugitive Slave Act of 1853 passed to remedy this problem, not only requiring free states to return slaves to their owners, but also making it a federal crime not to assist in doing so. Under the Fugitive Slave Act, hosting fugitive slave on one's property became dangerous. Fillmore's bigotry wasn't limited to African Americans. He was also noted for his prejudice against the growing number of Irish Catholic immigrants, which made him extremely popular in nativist circles. Number 8 out of 8. Herbert Hoover. Any president would have been challenged by Black Tuesday, the 1922 stock market crash that heralded the start of the Great Depression. But Herbert Hoover, a Republican, is generally viewed by historians as having not been up to the task. Although he initiated some public works projects in an attempt to combat the economic downturn, he resisted the kind of massive federal interventions that took place under Franklin Roosevelt. Hoover also signed into law the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, which caused foreign trade to collapse. However, Hoover is criticized of his use of army troops and lethal force to suppress the Bonner's Army protester, a largely peaceful demonstration in 1932 of thousands of World War I veterans who occupied the National Mall. What about Richard Nixon? Richard Nixon was the only president to resign from office. Is rightly criticized by historians for the abuses of presidential authority during the Watergate scandal. Nixon is considered the 16th worst president, a position that would have been lower if it not for his achievements in foreign policy, such as normalizing relations with China, and domestic achievements such as creating the Environment Protection Agency.